Let's discuss the Roaring Twenties. Rar. Um, you guys just watched a video that discussed the economics of the 20s. Today, we're going to dive into one part of the economics of the 20s and the economics of now. Um, so, you saw the splurge that was going on in purchasing in the 20s. And in fact, unlike what was going on in Germany, in our economy, the prices of things were going down, right? The price of a car went from really high to really low. And we saw all of these things that people were just being able to purchase in mass. Why? Well, there's this magical thing called credit. And today, we are going to be talking about credit. Credit is important to understanding the 20s for lots of reasons. The main reason is that it drove a lot of the spending spree that we see in the 20s, and it greatly affected the thing that we're going to talk about later this week, the stonk market. Sorry if you haven't seen the meme, that was just a mispronunciation. But rather than focusing on stocks today, let's just look at credit and make sure that we understand what this thing is. Now, I'm sure that if you guys have any familiarity with credit, it's probably credit cards, right? I would hold up my credit card to show you what a credit card looks like, but then you'll buy stuff with the numbers on it. So essentially, we take a card now and we incur credit for ourselves. Back then, it wasn't a card. You would do it store by store and sign off on something to do this step that now we can do with, a card. But when you do that, when you actually use the credit system, what are you doing? So hopefully you guys understand the basics. If you put something on credit, what you're really doing is purchasing something on debt, right? So that means instead of me handing you a $20 bill for something that costs $20, I'm handing you a piece of paper that says, I owe you $20. Does that make sense? So this I owe you is now debt. It is a debt that I have that I owe you. Here's the thing with purchases that are made on debt, right? These credit purchases, they're usually expected to be paid back then in a series of payments that I agree to at the point of purchase, right? So when I buy this thing from you that's $20, I don't usually say, hey, I'm going to buy this thing from you that's $20 on this credit card, and I'm going to walk back in 5 minutes and hand you a $20 bill, right? That's not really credit. Credit usually plays out like this. I'm going to buy this thing from you that costs $20 by handing you an IOU. I will then pay you $1 a week for the next 20 weeks. And at the end of those 20 weeks, I have now paid you my $20, right? Now, that could be a weekly payment. It could be a monthly payment. It could be a yearly payment. But ultimately, it is paying in little installments, little percentage pieces of the debt that I owe you. Except it's not quite that simple. Because in all of this conversation, we've talked about debt as if it's just one thing. It's just the initial cost. But it's not. It's got two pieces. So the two pieces are very important in understanding credit and why credit makes sense for businesses, right? So here's how it works. When I purchase from you, the IOU that I sign has, first off, the principal. So in my case, giving you the $20, the principal is $20. So if I eventually give you back the 20, I have paid off the principal. But that doesn't make sense for you as a business, right? You can't afford to keep your business running if everyone who buys something from you for $20 is only giving you $1 a week from that 20. You have to be making more money off of this for this actually to make sense as a system. So what you do then is you charge this thing called interest. And essentially, interest is a fee that is charged along with the regular payment that is based on a percentage of the principal remaining, right? So essentially, you're making more money by giving me interest, or excuse me, by giving me the opportunity to buy on credit. Because even though it takes you longer to get the value, you'll get more value, right? So instead of paying you $1 monthly, I'm going to be paying you either a higher amount with that extra cost being the interest, or I'm going to be paying you the same dollar a week, but for a longer time. And the difference in between the dollar that I'm paying you and the amount that the actual debt goes down is going to be changed by the interest rate. So let's do some quick calculations on this, right? So if we were to attempt to lay out this this proposition, then it could look something like this. Let's say that on a principal of $20, right? So you've got P equals 20. My backwards handwriting is not great. Your principal is $20. You charge me an interest rate of 10% to make, actually, let's make it 20%, all right? 20% compounded monthly, meaning every month you charge me 20%. Well, that means every month the interest rate equals 20 times 0.02. That's my interest rate. Well, nope, that's 2%. There we go. So 0.20, right? Well, if you do the math there, the interest that you charge monthly is $4. So every month, I owe you $4 on top of that 20. So every month that I haven't paid this, I owe you an extra $4. That's interest. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. We'll come back to that in a minute. If, however, you want to kind of get tricky, you could do something like, say, charge me $1 every week. If you charge me $1 every week on $20 at 20% interest compounded monthly, at the end of the week, how much, or excuse me, at the end of the month, how much money have I paid you? 1 times 4 equals $4. Wait a minute. How much money did I just say I owe you in interest? $4. So at the end of a month, I've paid you $4 in interest and $0 in principal. Meaning, you could charge me the 20% interest at $1 a month, or excuse me, $1 a week forever on $20. And I would have to pay you $4 a month forever because I'm never paying on the principal. I'm only paying the interest. Yikes. But don't worry, it could get worse. If you decide you're not going to make any payments, I guess it's me. If I decide I'm not going to make any payments, then what can happen is interest can become compounding, meaning that the interest rate stays the same, but the principal debt goes up because unpaid interest then joins the total debt I owe you. That looks like this. Scary chart, right? Now, this is built on a 20% interest rate, right? Most interest rates are lower than that, but for the sake of easy math, this is based on a 20% interest rate. If you make no payments and you have an interest rate of 20%, and that interest rate does not compound, right? Meaning your interest does not get added to the principal debt, it stays its own thing. It's always just interest on the original amount. Then if you start with $1,000, in 10 years, you will owe $3,000 if you've paid nothing, and it is charged every year, right? Once a year, you are charged interest. If, however, it is compounding interest and you're not making payments, if it becomes a yearly compounding, meaning at the end of the year, the amount that you owe is then added back to the principal. So it's $1,000 at a 20% interest rate. That means at the end of the year, you now owe $1,200, right? Then the next year, you owe I can't do math. 1,200. So you owe 200 again. You owe 1,420 something, I believe. Anyway, it just keeps going up. And it keeps adding up so that by the time you're 6 years in, you owe $3,000 because every year the interest that you owe is added on to your initial debt, and the interest rate is taken from a total value of unpaid interest and initial debt. Last thing on this one so that we don't get too confused here, but if this is compounded monthly, within a period of 8 years, you will owe $5,000, almost $4,800, on a $1,000 debt because that interest rate stays the same and the initial amount, that principal, continues to grow as the interest debt is added to it. So deep breath here. How does this actually apply to the 20s? Well, in the 20s, a lot of purchasing was made based on ads like this one. Well, these ones is. You see, all the way over there on that side, why pay cash? Why would you pay money straight up for something that you could buy for $1 over time? So essentially, what they do is the same whole math problem we worked out with this, right? If it costs $20 for that dress or jacket, suit, for that tailored suit. If it costs $20, they say, no. Pay $1 per week. That sounds so much cheaper. You're paying $1 a week, not 20. But then let's assume that this formula holds true. and they're making you pay 20% interest compounded monthly. That means your $20 dress, if you make only the minimum payment, your $20 dress is going to cost you $12 a year, or excuse me, it's per week. So $48 a year. Yes, it took me that long to do that math. $48 a year forever until you actually choose to pay more than the minimum payment, right? So if you paid $10 a week, okay, fine. You probably end up paying $12, something like that. Excuse me, $10 a week for $20. You end up paying $22, something like that. But if you're just making the minimum monthly payment, it sounds great. It's super cheap to buy the $20 dress for $1, but in reality, it's way more expensive. Just spread out over time, more expensive. The RCA radio over there, you can see it is a special for $88 or $250 weekly. So if we do the basic math on that, $88 divided by $250, I'm doing the math, okay? Don't hate. That's 35 weeks of payment. But you assume then there's probably going to be an interest rate on that low $250 because $250 a week is a total of $10 a month, right? So that's 1/8 of your total value, or 12%. So if they were charging you 10%, then only 2% of your payment actually goes towards the principal. And once again, we're not going to do the math again, but they could stretch this thing for years paying on an $88 radio. And you might look at these numbers that I'm throwing around, right, and say, well, Mr. Norman, so what? It's $20 or $80. It's not something that's going to make or break somebody's life, right? Until you throw it in the inflation calculator. Now, you remember, we talked about the inflation calculator back when we looked at cars and things like that for the 20s. The inflation calculator shows us that at the time, $20 was worth a little over, in modern cash, $250. So what we see then is that the total value that we're dealing with here is actually a lot more. And when we start doubling it and stretching it over years, it's hundreds or thousands of dollars for something that seems relatively simple, right? Sorry, the computer almost died. I had to plug it in. But we're back. So, like I said, it's a relatively large, consequential amount of money, even though it seems trivial initially, looking at the values. Now, you may look at that and be like, well, people wouldn't be dumb enough to get suckered into that, right? It's not like somebody's going to actually make the agreement to give away twice as much money, or at least 50% more money than you're going to have to just save up and buy it, right? Because you got to think about that. Like for this $20 dress, if you want to pay on it for 20 weeks, or excuse me, I keep saying dress, spring and summer tailored suit. If you want to pay on it for 20 weeks, you could literally save up $1 a week for 20 weeks and then pay cash, and you're only paying $20 for that item. If you put it on credit and allow interest to kick in, you might end up paying $40 for the $20 dress. Or worse, you just never pay on principal, pay forever on the interest, right? So why would you be willing to do that? Well, if it still seems cheap, people buy in, and then it's too late. They can't get out of it. Now, this is not something that was stuck in the 20s. In fact, credit after the 1920s and some things that happened immediately after the 1920s that we'll talk about very soon. Credit kind of stopped being as big of a deal for a long while. And then in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, the use of credit has grown and grown and grown. And you're probably used to seeing ads all the time that are like, 0% down and 20% APR financing after 20 years, blah, 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 blah. And there's all this stuff that they just mutter, right? Well, if you look visually at a car ad, you can see the stuff that they murmur at the end of the commercial like this, right? So this is a real thing here. Paramount Kia of Hickory. So if you want to go on over to Hickory, North Carolina, you can buy from these fine individuals. Not saying they're actually bad people. I'm just sorry. No offense if anyone ever watches this from Paramount Kia of Hickory. But if you look, it says for $99 a month and 0 down, you can have this Kia Soul. Yay! Basically cheap. $99 a month, I can have a car. Well, if you look down there at the total value of this vehicle, it's $12,980. So the sale price is $12,980. And you're getting it for $99 a month. It's going to take a long time to pay off. But they're even trickier than that. Because if you look at the fine print, right, it says that you are getting it for $12,980. And then you have a graduated payment plan that starts payments 1 through 3 at $99 a month. So you paid $300 over the course of 3 months. And then it jumps to $251 a month at a 9.99% or 10% annual per year rate. So your 10% rate there, 10% of $12,980 is math. Is about $1,300, right? So then you add up how many months they want you to pay on it, which is 72. So over the course of 72 months, you end up paying closer to $20,000. It's like 18 something or 19, somewhere in there. I did the math at one point. I think 18 something on the car. Once you include the $599 admin fee, the tax, and the tag fees, right? So 0% down, even in and of itself, is a little sketchy because you have to pay a $600 administration fee. But you're not putting any money on the car. So this is still around, guys. This is still happening now. You end up paying at least 50% more on the price, right? This $12,000 car or $13,000 car ends up actually being a $19,000 car at least. That's if you don't get behind on payments and the value of the principal isn't left too long. Point being, ladies and gents, this is here now. And it's being used on a far wider scale, even than it was in the 1920s. And ladies and gentlemen, our economy is booming, just like the 1920s. Nothing bad happened there, so it's probably all going to end up well. But anyway, your question for today is this. What's good about credit? What are some things you can think of as to why credit could be a good thing for you or for society as a whole? What are some bad things, right? What could be bad about the use of credit? And then ultimately, question that you'll have to answer for yourself, and that is, would you ever actually use credit? Would you put a significant purchase on credit, knowing what you know about how it works? Or, are you just going to do your homework? How is it going to work, right? What do you think? This is not meant to be something attacking anybody who uses credit. I just want you to understand that. But I do want you to think about it, especially when you see what's coming over the course of the rest of this unit. All right. With that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, answer your question. And next, we talk about the stock market. Woohoo. Let's just say if I hit this, I'll give you 2 extra credit points. Bullseye. Has to be a bullseye. I think I broke it. I'm going to end it now.